Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery. You can find us on the web, caltoncutlery.com. This is the second video in the, I don't know how many parts there's going to be, talking about how to sharpen a knife. In the first one, we went over comparing a pencil to a knife edge. The reason we did that was because just about everybody is familiar with a plain old number 2 pencil. Not only familiar with the pencil itself, but also its use, how a pencil goes dull, the lifespan of a pencil point, and the similarities between a pencil point and a knife edge. The basic idea is that everybody's familiar with a pencil, and then also I think the biggest reason that people have sharpening knives isn't because of the actual physical method of sharpening knives. That is really easy. It's why you're doing what you're doing when you sharpen a knife and for what purpose. And the fact that you just can't see a knife edge very well. I mean, let's face it, a knife edge is measured in thousandths of an inch. Last I heard, a human hair is 3 to 4 thousandths thick. If you have, say, a good paring knife, can be measured at the shoulder of the edge, which would be this point right here in our pencil analogy. With a good paring knife that might be anywhere from 2 to, say, 5 thousandths thick at the shoulder of the edge, this shoulder right here would be the thickness of a human hair. So that's very difficult to see without magnification. And let's face it, I mean, I've got a pocket microscope, one of the nice digital ones, that projects the image up onto your computer screen. But, how many people have that sort of thing? So by using the pencil, I hope to be able to describe what happens in an edge going from a freshly sharpened edge all the way through the lifespan of that edge, and then to the point where it needs resharpening, and then the resharpening process. So that's why I'm spending so much time describing edges, their use and everything, before we actually get the stones out and go through the process of sharpening. I think if you understand why, and you have an idea of what it is that you're trying to accomplish before you even break the stones out, your sharpening experience will be a whole lot nicer. You'll have better results and everything. So anyway, again, number 2 pencil, we're going to compare it to an edge. I got to thinking in the last video that a number 2 pencil, from this shoulder where the color of the pencil where you sharpen the paint off the side of the pencil and then you see the wood, that shoulder right there is just the shoulder of the edge. On most knives, there's also another taper in there. Everybody's got their own terminology for the geometry of a knife, the geometry of a knife blade, not so much just the edge. So this pencil right here would be very similar to this machete. Now, machetes don't generally have a whole lot of taper. They're very inexpensive tools and very simple also. So if you look at that pencil point, okay, that would be just like a machete. It's just as thick here as it is here, and then that shoulder right there would correlate to the shoulder here where the paint ends. Okay, now, and the reason I pulled out a machete is, one, it explains that geometry of the pencil. Now, also, the bigger knives, they're easier for you to see, especially since I don't know how to use my camera very well, and so, we're having some difficulties there. Now, another knife like this cold steel kukri, okay, it has a much thicker spine than the edge portion. Okay, so it has another bevel added. So if you look like this, for a typical knife that has I call these blade bevels. You know, some people call them primary, some people call them secondary. To me, that's a blade bevel because it's on the blade, and that's an edge bevel because it's the bevel leading to the edge. You know, call it what you want, but that's the way I remember it anyways. So just imagine with this pencil analogy that the sides of the pencil aren't straight, they're tapered just a little bit towards the back. And that'll get you pretty close to the blade geometry that we're after with the pencil. Okay, so there's defining the edge, a couple of examples and stuff. The next thing, now that we know what an edge is, it's two planes meeting at an exact point, or as exact as we can get it with the stones. The next thing to explain is how an edge wears. And that's where the pencil is really going to shine, because everybody has used a sharp pencil, used it through the point's lifespan until as it went from sharp to dull and it won't write anymore. Okay, so how does a pencil point dull? You take a freshly sharpened pencil and you start writing with it. If you never damage the pencil point, the exposed lead slowly wears away until there's no exposed lead anymore, or until you're tired of the wider lines and you sharpen it up to get a finer point. Okay, now that pencil point will wear at different rates. One would be the abrasiveness of the paper or wood or whatever it is that you're writing on. You take that pencil point and you draw it across some notebook paper that's fairly smooth, and that pencil point will last a good long time. Now you take that pencil point and you go to draw a line on a brick, that point's going to be worn out before you get, say 1.5 feet worth of marking. So the abrasiveness of the material that you're writing on affects the lifespan of the edge. Okay? Now, hand in hand with the level of abrasiveness of what it is that you're writing on is also the amount of pressure you put down on that pencil. The harder you push on that pencil, the faster the lead wears away, because the more lead that you're transferring to the paper. Now I say lead, I'm pretty sure that I think a number 2 pencil is not actually lead, it's graphite. But still, you know what I mean. So those are probably your two biggest sources of wear that turns a sharp pencil point into a dull pencil point, is the level of abrasiveness of the material that you're writing on and the amount of pressure that you're putting on the pencil to write. You'll also notice that as the point gets duller and duller, it takes more and more pressure to be able to make your marks on your paper. And we'll get to that in a bit. So, a number 2 pencil is, you can't really change very much on the pencil, okay? Most pencil sharpeners are set at a predetermined angle, so everybody is used to a pencil with one sharpening angle, give or take a couple of degrees. So what you end up with is almost everybody in the world is used to what that pencil, how much pressure it can take before it deforms. Knives go dull for 2 basic reasons. You have wear, which is through use, just wearing that pencil lead away, and then you have damage. Damage comes from going past the elastic limit of the material. Okay, so wood has got an elastic limit, graphite's got an elastic limit, so does steel. Okay, so if you take that pencil, and we've all done it, you push down too hard on the pencil lead, and what happens? You bust that pencil lead right out of there. So after, most adults, after having used a pencil over and over throughout the years, know about how much pressure they're going to put on that pencil lead before the lead breaks out. Now you do have instances where you get a bad pencil, and that graphite or the lead just will not stay on there. So what do? You chuck that pencil, grab a good one, and keep going. The same thing can happen with knives through poor steel selection, poor heat treating practices, the wrong steel for the application of that knife, and there's a whole bunch of others, but you kind of get the idea. All right, so how does all that relate to sharpening? Well, when you sharpen, you should sharpen for a reason. Okay, you're not just after getting that knife sharp. You're always walking a fine line when you're sharpening as to what it is that you're after to get the optimal performance for that knife. A chef's knife is not going to have the same sort of an edge as a machete will. There's no way. If you have a chef's knife that has a machete-like edge, it'll be a horrible chef's knife. You'll fight it. You'll wear out your hands and your wrists, and it'll just be an unpleasant experience. Now you take a machete and put a chef's knife edge on that machete, and that's going to be a horrible experience also, because you're going to be constantly resharpening it because you're going to get edge damage, not wear. When you get to the perfect angle and sharpening abrasive for the person who is using that knife in whatever application, instead of getting damage where the pencil lead breaks out, all you will get is wear, where that edge slowly wears away through use in cutting whatever it is that you're cutting, and you don't get damage. Knives tend to do that naturally, okay? And the reason that that happens is, let's say you get a brand new knife. Here's my Necker right here. And if it's ground properly, it'll be ground and heat treated to the maker's level of expectations for use for that particular blade. Okay? You use that knife too hard, you put too much pressure on it, you start putting that edge on stuff that it wasn't designed to handle, trying to cut through steel or concrete or bone or anything like that, and you will get damage. Now, you use that knife properly with the right amount of force, and you will just get edge wear. So when we're sharpening, you're constantly asking yourself, when a knife goes dull, you need to examine that edge and decide, why did it get dull? Did it get dull through wear, or did it get dull through damage? Now, if it got dull through damage, you have a couple of different choices. One, you can lighten up on the use of that knife. If you had a machete that had too fine of an edge, you could just use that machete on lighter saplings and not use it to chop through hardwood logs. You can take it easier on that edge, adjust your cutting style, which is what most people do with a pencil. You start breaking the pencil lead off, and you start lightening up on the amount of pressure that you write with so that the pencil lead doesn't break off. But through proper sharpening, you and that knife kind of come together and match each other. So let's say you grab a new knife and you take it out and you start using it, and you start seeing chipping or rolling. Chipping or rolling is fairly easy to describe. I've got a video called the brass rod test, where I go into detail about not only the brass rod test but the edge deformation test, where that's more geared towards knife makers when you're trying to develop your heat treat for a particular steel and a particular application of knife. But basically, all edges have an elastic limit. Okay, so if you take this piece of aluminum shim stock and think of it as an edge, if you bend that, it'll come back. You bend it a little bit more, it'll come back again. But at one point, you're going to bend it and it's going to stay bent. Okay, that would be a soft edge. A hard edge would be this wood shim. you know, for installing windows and doors and such. Okay, it's the same way. You push on it and it springs back. You push a little bit more, it springs back. At some point you push too much, that's a tough one, and it snaps. With correlating that to a knife, the edge would chip out. A piece of that steel would actually be removed from the edge. Okay, so when you examine your knife to see what it is that you're sharpening, if you have nothing but slow wear, there's no chips, there's no dents, okay, you're pretty close to where you need to be as far as sharpening angle and your use of that particular knife. And so at that point, really all you're doing is kind of touching the edge up. Now, if you have a lot of wear, like say you use that pencil, of course I didn't grab a pencil like that. You use that pencil to the point where it will not write anymore. Now you have to remove an awful lot more material from the sides of that pencil to get it sharp again. Remember, every time we're sharpening, you have to remove material. If you don't, at the proper angle, if you don't, you get a pencil that looks like the one on the right. This pencil was sharpened in a pencil sharpener. Okay, so when the pencil went dull, say we had this one here that was busted off. Okay, you have to take and do that. I sure hope you can see that. Okay, where you take this much material off to establish this angle again. Okay, if you are using, say, a mechanical sharpener or a guided sharpener that has a particular angle set, and you don't remove that material back like that, and you just take off the minimal amount of steel to produce an edge again, you end up with seriously thick shoulders on your edge that will affect your cutting performance. Okay, so you need to examine your edge and then think back on the lifespan of that edge and decide, okay, first, was it damage or was it wear? If it was just wear, you only have to remove a little bit of material. Again, we'll take our pencils. Okay, that's a fresh one, that's a busted one, and that one, we'll just call that one that was used down to the point where it wouldn't write anymore. But you have to remove the material from the shoulder of the edge, you know, getting back into your blade some more. Okay, you have to go back like that to establish a good true edge again. Now, this one that's been busted off has to take off a lot more material. This one that's been worn down, you won't have to take off quite as much. A pencil that's just creating a little bit wider line than what you're after, you might just have to take a few strokes on it. Okay, so the difference would be you take that pencil and toss it in the mechanical pencil sharpener, and you make 2 revolutions on the pencil sharpener, and that point is touched up. This pencil here with the tip busted off, you're going to have to put it in the pencil sharpener and crank on that thing for quite a while you're shaving all that extra wood off to establish a new point. So by examining your edge, where it's at right now, and thinking back on how you used that knife up until that point, you can decide how you're going to go ahead and sharpen that knife. Do you just need to touch it up, or do you need to establish whole new blade bevels? If you have a chip, say you chipped out a section of that knife, to establish a new true edge, you're going to have to grind that whole edge back to the point where you have a good angle and the entire edge doesn't have any chips in it. Now when you do that naturally, usually, like I said, since blades are thicker at the spine than they are at the edge, then that blade will thicken up and your angle will increase just through working your way back through the blade. If you have a dent, you might want to sharpen that out also, just like a chip. Or you might say, you know, there was that one time that I was cutting on something and I hit a nail. Okay, well, that section where I hit the nail, yeah, it chipped out or dented and it got damaged. But the rest of the edge, I was cutting styrofoam. And, you know, the rest of the edge wore down the way it should have. So at that point, do you decide sharpen the whole nick out and return the whole edge back to where it was, you know, the angle and everything that you had before you hit the nail? Or do you leave the nick in there, leave the rest of the edge, and then just kind of work around that nick so that you get the full use of the steel that's in the blade? You know, I think that's about as best as I can describe it. I think the next video we're going to go into, it'll probably be sharpening methods, stones versus mechanical sharpeners, different kinds of stones, and what you use those for. And then we might actually get to sharpen a knife. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made some sense, at least a little bit, and you can start correlating the edge of a knife to the point of a pencil. And yeah, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.